In the days following the verdict, the shockwave spread far beyond the courthouse walls. What had started as a regional story suddenly turned into a nationwide conversation. People weren't just talking about the crime anymore, they were talking about the man behind the pulpit, the woman accused of killing him, and the hidden world that unfolded between them. For many, the case forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about relationships, trust, and the expectations we place on public figures. And while the legal chapter of the story was officially closed, the emotional and social fallout had only just begun. At Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, where Pastor Brodes Perry once preached with passion and conviction, the atmosphere was a mixture of grief, confusion, and reflection. Church members stood outside the building the Sunday after the verdict, shaking their heads, wiping their eyes, and trying to process everything they had learned throughout the trial. Some felt betrayed, insisting that the details about Perry's private life had stained his legacy. Others refused to let the revelations overshadow the good he had done in their lives, choosing instead to remember the pastor who counseled them through hard times and inspired them with his words. One member said, "We lost him twice. First, the night he died, and then again when we learned who he really was." That sentiment echoed across the congregation, capturing the emotional conflict many people felt. Tabitha Perry, the pastor's widow, remained largely out of the public eye. After surviving the shooting and years of painful legal proceedings, she faced a new chapter of life without the man she loved and without the full truth of what had happened between her husband and Daniels. During the trial, she had shown strength and composure, but those close to her said she was carrying a weight that might take a lifetime to overcome. The verdict gave her a form of closure, but not the kind that erases wounds. Instead, it was the kind that forces someone to find a way forward, despite the scars left behind. Meanwhile, attention turned to Latasha Daniels, the woman at the center of the tragedy. Before her arrest, Daniels had built a respected career in social work, helping families in crisis and guiding vulnerable individuals through emotional struggles. But now, she was seen through a very different lens. Some people viewed her as a dangerous woman, driven by obsession and anger. Others saw her as someone who fell into a destructive emotional trap and lost control in a moment of unbearable pain. On social media, opinions were split. Some commenters called her cold-blooded, while others argued she had been manipulated, misled, or emotionally overwhelmed. Her story became a cautionary tale, not just about crime, but about mental health, emotional dependence, and the devastating consequences of unresolved heartbreak. Media outlets quickly picked up these debates, airing panel discussions, interviews with relationship experts, and commentary from religious leaders. One of the biggest points of discussion was the pastor's comments on ethical non-monogamy, a concept that suddenly became the centerpiece of thousands of online conversations. For many viewers, it was the most shocking revelation of the entire trial. How could a pastor, a figure expected to uphold traditional values, speak about such a controversial topic so openly? Some argued he was simply discussing social ideas from an academic perspective, that his comments had been misinterpreted and sensationalized. Others were convinced the videos reflected his personal beliefs, or even hinted at the emotional contradictions that led to the secret relationship with Daniels. Regardless of which side people fell on, one thing was certain: the videos changed how the public viewed the case. They added complexity where people wanted simplicity, and nuance where people expected straightforward answers. Instead of seeing the story as a simple narrative of a jealous woman killing a pastor, the public was now confronted with a deeper, messier reality, one where love, faith, temptation, and emotional vulnerability collided in ways no one could have predicted. As the debate spread, commentators began drawing larger lessons from the tragedy. Some religious leaders used the case to caution against idolizing pastors or assuming spiritual leaders are immune to temptation. Others emphasized the importance of emotional honesty and accountability, noting how hidden relationships and buried feelings can turn toxic when left unchecked. Relationship experts talked about the dangers of emotional entanglement, especially when one person feels deeply attached and the other begins to pull away. And in mental health circles, the case sparked discussions about attachment wounds, emotional instability, and how quickly heartbreak can spiral into violence if not addressed. In communities across Memphis and beyond, People gathered in living rooms, coffee shops, and church halls to discuss what the case meant for them. For some, it was a reminder that even deeply respected people can make catastrophic mistakes. For others, it was a story about the fragility of emotional boundaries and how important it is to recognize when a situation is becoming dangerous. The case also prompted a broader conversation about how society treats relationships that don't fit traditional molds. Some questioned whether the pastor's interest in ethical non-monogamy hinted at a deeper conflict within himself, a tension between his spiritual role and his private desires. Others believed that the concept had nothing to do with the crime at all, but the public fixated on it because it felt scandalous, controversial, and unexpected. Amid all these debates, one thing became painfully clear. The case didn't leave just one victim behind. It left an entire community grappling with grief, moral questions, and the harsh reality that even the people we admire most are capable of living complicated, contradictory lives. Families were torn, friends were divided, and church members struggled to reconcile the pastor they knew with the man revealed in the trial. And somewhere behind prison walls, LaTasha Daniels faced the consequences of a moment that changed her life forever, a moment she could never take back, no matter how many times she replayed it in her mind. Yet, even with all the emotions and debates, one question lingered in the air. Did the verdict truly bring justice? In the next part, we will look at the final layer of this story, how the case continues to impact the public, what people believe justice really means in a tragedy like this, and why the story of Pastor Brodes Perry refuses to fade away even after the trial has ended. When the investigation into Pastor Brodes Perry's murder began, detectives in Collierville knew they were dealing with more than just a crime of passion. What seemed at first like a straightforward domestic tragedy quickly turned into a complex web of emotions, secrets, and conflicting narratives. Inside the quiet suburban home where the shooting happened, investigators found a scene that raised as many questions as it answered. A respected pastor dead, his wife injured but alive, and the alleged shooter, LaTasha Daniels, sitting in shock as police took her away. According to the police report, when officers arrived, Daniels didn't try to run. Instead, she reportedly kept repeating the same words. "I just wanted to talk." Those words would become the foundation of her defense, the idea that she never intended to kill anyone, that the gun went off in a moment of emotional chaos. But as investigators pieced together the evidence, that claim began to crumble. Inside her bag, they found a handgun and ammunition. Her fingerprints were on the weapon, and her phone contained a series of messages that prosecutors later described as evidence of obsession. In the days following the murder, detectives began interviewing everyone who knew Brodes Perry. Church members described him as kind, disciplined, and deeply committed to his faith. But a few hinted that in the months before his death, something about him had changed. He seemed distracted, more distant than usual, as if carrying a burden he couldn't share. His wife Tabitha, still recovering from her injuries, told police that she had sensed tension in the days leading up to the shooting, but never imagined something like this could happen. She described hearing raised voices that night, an argument that escalated too quickly for anyone to stop. The turning point in the investigation came when authorities retrieved messages exchanged between Perry and Daniels. They showed a relationship that had once been affectionate, but had grown increasingly volatile. Daniels sent long, emotional messages about love, betrayal, and promises unkept. Perry's responses were shorter, colder, as if he was trying to create distance. In one message, he reportedly wrote, "This has to stop before we both lose everything." It was the kind of line that prosecutors later used to paint a picture of a man who wanted out, and a woman who couldn't accept it. When the case finally went to trial, years later, the courtroom became a stage for both tragedy and revelation. Family members, churchgoers, and reporters filled the seats. Everyone wanted to understand how a respected pastor and a devoted social worker ended up in such a deadly confrontation. The prosecution's case was straightforward. LaTasha Daniels, driven by jealousy and rejection, went to Perry's house, armed and ready to confront him. When things didn't go her way, she pulled the trigger. It was, in their words, an act of rage disguised as heartbreak. The defense, however, tried to frame it differently. They portrayed Daniels as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed by years of manipulation and false hope. They claimed she didn't plan to kill anyone, that she simply wanted closure. Her lawyer told the jury she wasn't a monster, she was a woman in pain. But that argument struggled to stand against the mountain of evidence. Ballistics, reports, witness statements, and forensic analysis all pointed to one conclusion, that the shooting was intentional. And yet, beneath the surface, there was another angle that grabbed everyone's attention, something that went beyond the crime itself. During the trial, the jury was shown videos of Pastor Perry recorded months before his death. In those videos, he spoke openly about relationships and a concept known as ethical non-monogamy, the idea that people can engage in multiple romantic relationships with honesty and mutual consent. For a pastor, it was a shocking revelation. The courtroom went silent as clips played of him discussing ideas about love, commitment, and emotional freedom. Some said the videos were taken out of context, that he was merely exploring modern relationship dynamics from a philosophical perspective, but others believed they revealed something deeper. A man wrestling with his own desires and contradictions. The media seized on it instantly. Headlines exploded across social networks. Pastor preached about ethical non-monogamy before murder. YouTube commentators dissected every word, trying to find hidden meaning in his sermons. Was he confessing something? Was this philosophy linked to his relationship with Daniels? No one could say for sure, but the timing of those recordings, just months before the affair allegedly began, made the speculation almost impossible to ignore. In court, the prosecution didn't dwell on the videos too much, but they didn't have to. The public had already made up its mind. For some, the footage painted Perry as a hypocrite, a man preaching virtue while living in contradiction. For others, it made him seem human, flawed, conflicted, struggling with questions that many people face but few admit. Either way, the narrative had changed. This wasn't just a story about murder anymore. It had become a conversation about morality, faith, and the private lives of public figures. As witnesses took the stand, the emotional toll of the trial grew heavier. Members of the Perry family wept as they described the pain of losing someone they loved. Friends of Latasha Daniels spoke about her once promising career, now destroyed. There were moments of tension, anger, and deep sadness. At one point, Daniels herself took the stand. Through tears, she told the jury that she had loved Brodes Perry, that she never wanted to hurt him, and that she only went to his house that night because she wanted to talk face-to-face one last time. Her voice cracked as she said, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But when the prosecutor asked her why she brought a loaded gun, the courtroom fell silent. Daniels had no clear answer. The trial dragged on for weeks. Every day, new details surfaced: messages, phone logs, witness testimonies, each adding another layer to a story already filled with contradictions. The jury listened closely, weighing not just the evidence but the emotions behind it. And as the days passed, it became clear that this wasn't a case with simple villains or heroes. It was a story about people flawed, emotional, and ultimately broken by choices they couldn't undo. When closing arguments began, the prosecution focused on intent. They told the jury that Daniels' actions were deliberate, that she went to the house prepared for confrontation. They reminded everyone that Perry was shot multiple times, not by accident, but with purpose. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded for understanding. They spoke of heartbreak, of mental strain, of a moment of emotional collapse. But by then, the evidence spoke louder than the arguments. When the verdict was finally read, the room went completely still. Guilty of second-degree murder and reckless endangerment. Some cried, others sighed in relief. Daniels showed little reaction, her face blank, as if her emotions had already been spent long ago. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, microphones ready, as the story broke across national media. After 6 long years, the Brodes Perry case had reached its conclusion, or at least one chapter of it, but even as justice was served, the debate continued. Was this simply a tragic love story gone wrong, or was it something deeper, a reflection of how personal and spiritual lives can collide in devastating ways? Pastor Perry's name became a symbol of that duality. A man of God who inspired thousands, yet whose private life revealed contradictions that made him painfully human. And for those who followed the case from the beginning, the verdict didn't just close a legal file, it opened a larger conversation about morality, relationships, and the price of hidden truth. In the next part, we'll explore the aftermath, how this case changed lives, divided communities, and why, even after the verdict, people across the country are still asking whether justice was truly done. After almost 6 years, justice has finally spoken. Today, a Tennessee jury delivered its long-awaited verdict in one of the most shocking cases in modern church history. The murder of Pastor Brodes Perry, a man once celebrated for his passion, leadership, and charisma, is now remembered for a tragedy that shattered a community and exposed a web of secrets no one saw coming. The verdict may be out, but the questions remain. How did a respected pastor become the center of a deadly love triangle? What really happened that night in 2019, and why is everyone talking about it again today? On November 8, 2025, the Shelby County jury found LaTasha Daniels guilty of second-degree murder and reckless endangerment in the killing of Pastor Brodes Perry. It was the end of a long, emotional trial that gripped Memphis and beyond, a trial where love, faith, betrayal, and violence collided in ways no one could have imagined. As the judge read the verdict, gasps echoed in the courtroom. After years of silence and speculation, the story that had once faded into mystery suddenly returned to the headlines. Old videos of Perry's sermons began circulating online, and social media was flooded with clips, commentary, and heated debates. People who had never even heard of Pastor Perry before were now deep diving into his life, his beliefs, and the events that led to his tragic death. To understand why this verdict matters so much, we need to go back to who Pastor Brodes Perry really was. He wasn't just another preacher. Brodes Perry was dynamic, charismatic, and known for connecting with people on a deep level, serving as the executive pastor at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis. He was considered a rising star, someone who could blend faith with modern-day relevance. His sermons were heartfelt, often tackling real issues like love, forgiveness, and relationships. Many saw him as a man who lived what he preached, devoted to his family, committed to his faith, and admired by his congregation. He was married to Tabitha Perry, and together they seemed to represent the perfect couple united by love and faith. They worked side by side in church events, guided young couples, and inspired countless people with their story. But behind that picture-perfect image, something else was happening, something few people knew about. Beneath the surface of his carefully maintained public persona, there were hidden emotions, private messages, and a connection that would soon spiral out of control. In early 2018, Pastor Perry met a woman named LaTasha Daniels. She was well-educated, confident, and worked as a social worker, someone who, on paper, looked like a person dedicated to helping others. What started as a professional friendship built around shared values and conversations about faith soon became more personal. According to what later surfaced in court, their relationship crossed the line between mentorship and intimacy. No one from the outside world suspected anything at first. Daniels lived in another city, and Perry's reputation as a man of faith remained spotless. But the text messages, call records, and testimony that came later revealed a relationship that was intense, emotional, and ultimately destructive. At some point, that relationship came to an end. The reasons remained debated, whether it was guilt, fear of exposure, or simply a loss of interest. But for LaTasha Daniels, it wasn't something she could easily let go of. Prosecutors said she felt betrayed, that she believed Perry had promised her a future. Friends claimed she became obsessed, replaying conversations, rereading messages, and even reaching out to people close to him. What had once been an emotional bond had turned into anger, heartbreak, and a dangerous fixation. Then came the night that changed everything. It was April 4, 2019, a calm evening in Collierville, Tennessee. Inside their home, Pastor Perry and his wife were settling in when an unexpected visitor arrived at their door. It was LaTasha Daniels. According to police reports, she showed up unannounced, insisting she needed to talk. What exactly was said in that living room remains partly unclear. But neighbors later told investigators they heard shouting, and moments later, several gunshots. When officers arrived, the scene was devastating. Pastor Brodes Perry was dead. His wife, Tabitha, had been shot but survived. And the woman at the center of it all, LaTasha Daniels, was taken into custody right there at the scene. The news spread like wildfire. A beloved pastor gunned down inside his own home. The community that once looked up to him was now drowning in shock and disbelief. How could this happen? How could a man who preached about peace and love end up dying in such violence? For church members, it was almost impossible to comprehend. For the media, it was the perfect storm: faith, romance, betrayal, and murder. As the days turned into weeks, the headlines kept coming. Reporters dug into Perry's background, old sermons resurfaced, and people started asking uncomfortable questions. Was this just a crime of passion, or was there more beneath the surface? Investigators soon discovered a trail of evidence: text messages, phone records, and statements that revealed a complicated emotional relationship between Perry and Daniels. One of the most haunting details came from a statement prosecutors claimed Daniels made after the shooting: "You broke my heart, and now you have to pay." Whether she actually said it or not, that single line became the defining soundbite of the entire case. For those who knew Pastor Perry, this new image was hard to accept. How could the same man who guided so many souls also be involved in something like this? For others, it was a reminder that behind every pulpit, behind every public figure, there are private struggles we rarely see. The story became more than just a murder case. It became a mirror reflecting the complexity of human nature, love, and betrayal. Even years after his death, the case never completely disappeared. Every few months, new theories, videos, and discussions would pop up online. And now, with this week's verdict, the story has come full circle. After years of waiting, the court has spoken. Justice, in one form or another, has been delivered. But even as the doors of the courtroom close, the world is still left wondering, who was the real Brodes Perry? The preacher, the lover, or the victim of his own choices? In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the investigation, the evidence, the courtroom drama, and the shocking revelations that brought this tragic story back into the spotlight once again.